Welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Dana Nichols, editor at the Calaveras Enterprise. And tonight I'm very pleased to have with me Supervisor Steve Kearney. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Good evening.
Steve represents District 5. And Steve, you're nearing the end of your second year on the board. You've been targeted by a recall. The people in your district who favor a recall did get enough signatures, so there is a recall on the November 8th ballot. So that's what we wanted to talk about a little bit. Their main complaint is that one of them is that you were willing to allow an asphalt plant to operate at Hogan Quarry without a conditional use permit. Tell us why you made that decision, the context, whether you think you did the right thing.
Well, a conditional use permit obviously is what it sounds like. For a business to go into operation, certain conditions might be put on it for it to be in operation. I was told by our environmental manager, who at the time was Brian Moss, literally the first day that I pointed the project out to him, that for the asphalt plant to go into operation, it would an authority to construct would have to be issued. Frankly, as a planning commissioner for 4 years, I never dealt with an authority to construct. I did not even know what it was or what it took to get it done, so I had to research it myself. Basically, an authority to construct was going to require whatever the environmental manager and the Air Resources Control Board told it to do. And as it turned out, everything that could have been required in a CUP was required during the authority to construct process, and that's where the project sits now. Had I insisted a CUP done, basically you'd be asking for the work to be done twice. And it's the last I heard, it was sitting waiting for an environmental impact report to be done, and that is what was reported in your newspaper last April, as well as other news sources locally. And it's at that stage now, and I don't really know what progress it's made or lack thereof.
Well, it's essentially not happening now. What happened was the proponents withdrew it for the time being because they didn't want to pay for an environmental impact report, given that they, for the moment, have been able to meet their needs elsewhere. It doesn't mean they won't apply again, but for the moment, it's not happening at that location.
I can almost say you know more about it currently than I do.
Well, I had to call him up and ask him because I was very confused, because at the time that the CUP conditional use permit vote was done, I didn't understand, and I think a lot of other people didn't, that the people in the air management district were going to require that study anyway. And so I'm curious, when did you find out that the air district would require that kind of study of the impacts anyway?
Well, they were talking about it a year ago last August when it came out of the Planning Commission. But legitimately, probably April, when it was reported. The planning director and the environmental manager who issued that press release in April didn't consult with the Board of Supervisors to make that decision, nor were they required to. So literally until they made the decision, that's when I knew about it. Did I know the process was evolving? Yes, I did. But you also have to understand that when a project comes out and you have a side that is an opponent as well as a side that's a proponent, then the supervisors can't discuss it because you're literally protecting the liability of the county and thus the citizens too. So what I knew and actually was learning about an authority to construct all along was it wasn't something that I could go out and to discuss because both sides had an opinion, and the supervisors had to do the best they could to stay neutral until the project was brought to them.
When you campaigned for supervisor, you expressed concern for the vibrancy of our local economy and a desire to do what you could to bring more jobs here. And I would like just to ask, on the asphalt plant issue, tell me how that played into it, because some residents, the critics of the plant, feel like, oh, well, he wants a few asphalt plant jobs at the expense of our neighborhood. How did you weigh those competing interests?
Well, literally, as a supervisor, after you bring attention to a project, you're out of it. I'm not a planning director or I'm not an environmental manager. When it was brought to my attention initially, how did I weigh that? Of course, there's not going to take many jobs to produce asphalt at the plant. But it's just like when I sat in traffic one day at the 26 and 12 project when they were improving it, there were 22 people working from 4 different companies. It is the jobs that are created by something like that I looked at. Was that the right fit for the county? That truly wasn't the supervisor's call. As I said, that was going to go to an authority to construct in the long run, and that's what it did.
Yeah. The other issue that the recall proponents brought up was the turn lane that developer Ryan Voorhees had been obligated to build there on Olive Orchard Road at Highway 26. At the recommendation of staff, ultimately the board decided that they weren't going to force Voorhees to pay for that. And, the context partly is a slowed economy. He didn't build as many houses as expected. The traffic projections changed. But I'd like to know, was that a mistake to vote to let Ryan not have to pay for that?
No. When Ryan Voorhees or his company or his representatives, whoever it was, I'm not in that part of it, brought it to the planning department. The planning department required him to do a engineering study, which was part of the packet that was presented to both the planning commission as well as the board of supervisors. The engineering study was paid for by the applicant, who was Voorhees or his company, and then. But it was done independently of them. They didn't choose the company. So the independent engineering study was presented to Caltrans. Caltrans had no desire, and they made the comment that they weren't going to require any work to be done there. Public Works Department reviewed it. They didn't require any work to be done there, and neither did the planning department. So we had Caltrans and all the staff recommending that be basically forgiven, for lack of a better term, in his agreement, and we took staff's recommendation, as did the planning commission. It wasn't a mistake. It was the result of quite a bit of study that was done at the applicant's expense, but still done independently of his control.
Thank you. Let's jump to the cannabis industry.
Sure.
You are part of the board majority that favors regulating the industry. And the urgency ordinance that you voted for in May, it set a deadline for legal farms to register, charged the farm owners $5,000 each, and allowed the county departments to hire code inspectors and sheriff deputies to enforce the rules. Tell us why you favor this approach.
Well, if you followed the pathway to that vote, you'll understand that when it initially came up, I voted against it. I voted against it initially because I didn't feel there were any protections or provisions for law enforcement. And I think that the law enforcement needs are very important. I believe that the production of cannabis is here. It's been here for all of my life, basically, and there's a need to try to find a solution to it growing here. We have a lot of territory that's being farmed with no intention of meeting regulations or legality. By voting this regulation ordinance in, we at least started the process of bringing law enforcement into it, recognizing that there is probably a good deal of people who want to be legitimate and finding a way to identify those who are not and going forward with it. Now, I'll be the first to say that there are needs in the urgency ordinance that need to be addressed. Law enforcement has expressed some of them. Code enforcement has expressed needs. So there's a lot of work to be done on it, which is why I also asked that on February 14th, and the board agreed, we have a date set in 2017 to review it again. But, I mean, naturally, we have initiatives on the ballot that have to be dealt with also.
Right. Well, and some of the initiatives may not even be on the ballot yet. There are people gathering signatures to put a ban on commercial marijuana production on the ballot. And some critics of the regulation say that they would prefer to just ban it. Why don't you favor a ban?
We've actually banned more marijuana through this regulation than they've done in years. The last count, and I think another one was just reported in your paper, they've been pulling out thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of plants. We have not been able to ban it successfully. And further, law enforcement is so underfunded, and if you follow the funding that they've been given over the last 10 years, there's not the money to give them to go out and aggressively enforce a ban. Frankly, an out ban has not worked. We've done more with the urgency ordinance than they've been able to accomplish in many years. If you, and I say this many times, if you take the 61,000 plants they pulled out, and since the urgency ordinance was passed this year, which is far more than was reported last year, and you take an average of 2 pounds a plant, that means we kept over 120,000 pounds of marijuana off the black market. So you asked me, why don't I favor a ban? Well, actually, I think we did ban a lot. Last year, you reported 12,000 plants being pulled. This year, we're way over 60,000 already.
Depending on how the election comes out, a whole lot of different things could happen.
Correct.
But it is conceivable that, for example, you could end up in a situation where you have a ban, but you don't have the revenue from Measure C. Measure C, you voted to put that on the ballot so that the voters could put a tax
Correct.
on the marijuana industry. But what if you end up sitting on the board and there is a ban to enforce, and you don't have the revenue for Measure C, and you no longer have the fees to enforce code enforcement? What would you do? Would you favor taking steps like adding new taxes on the residents here to pay for eradicating marijuana?
I'm not really a new tax theory type person. I don't like to see that. Dana, I honestly don't know what we would do to enforce a ban. And I haven't heard anybody give me any hints. If a full-out ban was put on the county, what would I do to enforce it? I don't know how to answer that for you. I'm very good with the numbers. I know what law enforcement used to be, and the money devoted to the sheriff has gone down in the last 10 years dramatically. And that doesn't even account for inflation. Our sheriff, just to be on par with where it was 10 years ago, give or take a buck or two, $2.5 million short. When they say they don't have 20 plus deputies they used to have, he's not joking. They really don't. And that doesn't even take into account, if you look on the budgets over the past 10 years, there's a Calaveras narcotics unit that used to be funded by different grants that they got, et cetera, but that's underfunded also. Our district attorney's budget has not progressed. Our dispatch budget has not progressed. Law enforcement budgets are, over the last 10 years, have gone down consistently.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's actually here on my list. The whole county government is smaller because of what has happened since 2008 financially. This year, you and other supervisors voted to use what Shirley Ryan, the county administrative officer, calls one-time funds. In other words, you dipped into savings, like the Teeter Fund, to hire positions. And normally, Shirley doesn't recommend doing that. It's somewhat of a risk to use one-time money to hire staff because that's an ongoing cost. So tell me how you think about taking on this risk. Is it an appropriate risk to take on? In other words, why did you do this?
A risk out of the Teeter Fund? The Teeter Fund is not a one-time fund. I don't even know how it got that name. People should really look it up and try to understand it. It is a consistent fund that comes in that was created in this county that in many counties doesn't exist. It's without getting overly technical with it, it's a tax penalty that comes to the county. In other counties, it comes in and it's dispersed into the appropriate agencies. Here, we have it in a fund. To not use that when the citizens in the county has needs, there's nothing one time about it. If it was one time, why did it grow from last year?
I'm telling you, I mean, they consider it one-time money because it's not a regular revenue source like property tax or sales tax. Instead, it's penalties that fluctuate somewhat.
But my comeback to that is neither is sales tax. The economy goes down, and you don't get the sales tax that you got when the economy was growing. Property tax, we already saw what happened with that. The housing market tanked, and property tax revenues disappeared.
Now what you're saying is you're committed to using the Teeter Fund every year to fund that if need be, because in the past they used Teeter for capital expenditures, things like technology purchases, computers, and so forth.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying this one time we used it, but it's not one-time funds, and I take exception to that comment every time it's made.
Okay. Now, some of those positions that were funded were personnel at the jail because the jail was way understaffed. The sheriff really needs more deputies on patrol. I mean, he's down by something like a couple dozen deputies from what he was before the recession hit. What is your approach? And I know that we've had tiny bits of revenue growth, but 1.6% bump in the property tax revenue is not even as much as what it's costing us in increased salaries and benefits costs.
Granted.
So we're kind of in a situation where the revenue is pretty stagnant compared to the cost, but we need more personnel. So what's your approach to approaching this, especially for the sheriff's office and public safety?
Okay, I'm not 100% sure I understand your question.
How do we add public safety positions given that we don't have revenue increases sufficient?
I think there's been more money there than people realize, and we brought that up when you have workers' comp go from $800,000 to $1.4 million in 1 year. I've dealt with workers' comp charges for a long time. I believe that if you needed to go back and find money in the budget, there is some there. Is there enough to replace $3 million that they probably need? No, and we're going to have to continue to work on that. I do think our property tax revenue is going to go up because the value of our homes has been increasing. Is it going to go up dramatically like it did, say, 2007, 2008, when we had wild increases? I hope not, because I don't think that's a healthy economy either. I don't believe we're going to have enough to give them 26 deputies, but I think we're going to be able to add a little bit each year. And plus, we also have to remember, Dana, if we continue to regulate through the urgency ordinance and Measure C gets passed, that is a lot of revenue, 10 to 20 million that could come to the county. And that could be used to fund deputies. But we also have other needs that have been neglected. Our Public Works Department has been underfunded for a while. People come to you and they ask why they have weeds growing up in the middle of their asphalted roads. Well, it's because we don't have the money to correct them all.
You just touched on this briefly, but tell me what your beliefs are about the economic future of the county. I mean, are we looking at growth, stagnation, contraction? What do you think is likely to happen here?
I think that we're going to have moderate growth. I think we've tunneled out where we bottomed out was a better term. Bottomed out where it's going to not have the decreases like we did. And I think that the county's going to grow moderately. The Butte fire obviously didn't do us any favors because a lot of people just did not want to stay. If you were a renter and you lost everything up there, well, you may not have the same motivation to rebuild. And some of the people that built, used to look out their windows and see beautiful tall trees, and they don't now. So that's not keeping everybody here. But I think we're going to continue to recover in a moderately growing way. Valley Springs is seeing homes being built again. And homes aren't disappearing on the same note. The others are still there, and we're starting to see new homes come. I think we've got a good future, and I think it's started to roll again.
So along those lines, what can the county government do to foster economic prosperity?
It was critical to get the general plan passed. I promised to work hard on that. Honestly, when I was running for office, and honestly, the hard work was done by the Planning Commission and the Planning Department. All I did was, as the other supervisors, support the commissioners who were working on it. And we have that going forward now. We have to be able to say to businesses that want to come here what the land use roadmap is. You've brought up the asphalt plant. I don't know, but I've heard rumors of their legal fees that are astronomical. Well, we need to be able to say to a business that you're not going to come here and have to do that. That doesn't mean that every piece of property is going to work for every business. But at least if we have that outlined and our general plan is going to do that, we'll have a way for them to come and do business with us. If you watch the roads to Amador, San Joaquin, and Tuolumne County on the weekends, our residents are all going there to shop. Do I want us to lose our country charm? Well, of course I don't. So I don't have this vision of large box stores on every corner, but there are appropriate businesses that could be here. And some of them are chain stores. And Valley Springs is starting to see that happen now.
I'm jumping around because there's so many topics to deal with. Tree mortality, not just the dead ones from the Butte fire, but all those bark beetle trees dying. Not as much in your district, but still up the hill and a huge issue for the county. What should the county do to address the tree mortality crisis?
Right now I'm depending on two supervisors to tell us. We are going to have to continue to seek aggressively federal funding, grants, state funding, whatever, to get rid of this, as is every county across the Sierra. It is devastating. And it's not just a certain softwood. When I took a drive through it, cedars were being attacked. And when I lived in Tuolumne County many years ago and the beetle kill was going through, cedars were never affected. So this is a whole new, very devastating attack. What am I going to do? I'm going to support any opportunity we have to remove them. I hope when we hire these companies, it's going to be with local help. That is something that's on my mind. But we're going to have to find uses for them also. I read a study, and I'm very involved in solid waste issues, read a study where if they create a mulch out of these trees and put it on the new growth, like the orchards that you see when you go down Highway 26, they can reduce water usage by 31%. Well, water is liquid gold in California right now. So there's one way where we can start to use some of them. There has to be a lot of different approaches, though, because we have a lot of trees that are dying.
Yeah. Steve, District 5 currently has the distinction of being the district in Calaveras County with the longest run of one-term supervisors. How do you think about this? Is this a problem, and why or why not?
Is it a problem? I mean, I don't know. I knew it when I was going into it. I didn't go into it blindly. There's a very aggressive group of political people that are somewhat contentious, and you have to deal with them. One-term supervisors, and this is the 6th recall attempt. I think since 1982. Mm-hmm. Why is it? Dana, I wish I knew, because I would certainly solve it. My intention is to beat the recall and to try to bring a sense of unity to the county in District 5. And I hope I can do that. That's a main goal.
We have just a few minutes left, and that was actually something
Only a few? I got a lot to say.
I know. Well, what I'm going to, I have one last question, and then you can make a closing statement.
Sure.
But this one is, what can you do to address the divisions that exist in your community? I mean, what do you want to do to?
Well, I want to continue working hard in some of the areas that I've worked in. For instance, I never knew I would know as much about the issues affecting our senior citizens, and I did not know when I was running for office that District 5 has the highest percentage of seniors. Continuing to work in these areas to bring services to them, I believe brings people together. And for me to continue to do my job, this recalls on 2 issues. I work with many issues that has the potential to improve the county. Solid waste. I worked with a very good group to improve the CSA committee in Rancho Calaveras. Hope to bring jobs that work to the area, and we're seeing some of that. Stay in touch with the community, and I do my best to do that. Today's been a perfect example. I have started out doing an interview. I went to a luncheon for Senior Volunteer of the Year. I'm here talking to you. Then I'm heading to another dinner. And that's not, I mean, I enjoy those things. It's great to stay in touch with everybody, but it also lets them talk to me.
So we have just maybe 30 seconds left. What else would you like to say in a closing statement to the voters for District 5?
Well, I mean, I understand that they've been told a lot of things to get them, to entice them to sign the recall. But as I've talked to them and explained, we've been able to point out the validity of the issues. And going forward, I do believe I'm their best candidate to continue to serve. And, I'm looking forward to it. I've enjoyed the last 2 years, and I'm looking forward to going forward.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Inside View. Good night.